tossed and turned over this for many, many years. This has been a topic that has come up specifically between me and the guy in the purple shirt often. I greatly believe that Tim Duncan is that much better than Kobe Bryant. And I really don't feel like it has a lot to do with stats. Like, if you're looking at both of their stats, I feel like, what do you call it? I feel like they both played almost 20 years. They both have 5 rings. They're both in the Hall of Fame. Like, first team All-NBAs is very comparable. 15 All-NBA selections for both of them. Like, all defense, et cetera, et cetera. I really think, for me, the biggest difference between the two comes down to mentality and leadership. And I know that might upset some people in this floor I got to deal with here. So, even though Duncan had the consistent leadership of Greg Popovich over a long period of time, and Kobe had to deal with different coaches, Kobe was not a natural leader like Tim Duncan was. I don't care what anybody says. He had to grow into that. Tim Duncan was a leader from day one, and it led to winning. Never had a season where you won less than 50 games. Ever. Not once. Not one time. The only time was in a lockout shortened season. And guess what? They won the championship. So I don't even count it. His lowest win percentage was 61%. All he did was win. And the biggest reason for that is he was a guy who kept his troops calm in battle. Kobe is screaming at Pau Gasol. He's berating Shaq, called him fat and ugly. Crazy. Tim Duncan, shoulder to cry on. What's going on at home, man? Everybody doing good. Like, Tim Duncan, in the locker room, in the huddle, on the court, kept his team calm. And what happened? You saw some of the greatest passing teams of all time to finish his career. Because they all had this mentality where they played free and stress-free. And I genuinely think that comes from their leader, Tim Duncan. That's my main spiel. Please attack me. Come and get it. I'm ready.
All right, I'll definitely go first. So wouldn't we say, like, winning, like, what level of winning are we talking about? Like, it sounds like you're okay with mediocrity. You're saying, hey, we won 50 games, that's great, because last time I checked, in that decade, that 2000 to 2010, that time frame, there were 10 NBA finals. 7 of those NBA finals had Kobe Bryant in them. Tim Duncan won on a lockout weird season, but whatever, we give him that, obviously. We don't take away Dallas Mavericks championship or whatever, but
they were still the number one winning team in the league that year. So
I'm sorry?
What you're saying doesn't matter. If we're talking about winning, it was far from mediocre.
Yeah, okay. But all I'm saying is, when we talk about Magic Johnson and Larry Bird in the 80s, and we at a point in time, Larry Bird was considered better than Magic Johnson. By the end of that decade, they were like, Magic Johnson won 5 championships. He was in the finals almost every freaking year. He's the better player. But for whatever reason, in the 2000s, when the same thing happens, you got a guy who's in the NBA Finals 7 of those 10 years, won 5 of those championships, and it was the Spurs-Laker dynasty. Every single time the Spurs lost in the playoffs, besides I think 2005, Kobe was the last that face for the most part that beat him. So I'm just saying, Kobe's 18-12,
all alone. All alone by himself.
Kobe's no one with 18-12.
No giant, enormous 7'1", 325-pound monsters behind him at all.
I had a feeling you were going to talk about Shaq, so that's great. Tim Duncan was 12-18 against Kobe Bryant, meaning had a losing record in the playoffs. And a lot of people would then mention Shaq, just like you did. And without Shaq, he was 1-4. It was worse. We put belt to. I can't even say that for YouTube purposes. All right.
You were 1-4?
No. Tim Duncan was 1-4. Kobe beat him 4-1, 2008. So without Shaq, Kobe Bryant went to 3 NBA finals in that decade, back to back. He was the only player in NBA history in a 3-year span to beat 10 50-win teams in that span. In his career, Kobe Bryant has beat 26 50-win teams, the most in NBA history. So we're literally talking about if Kobe Bryant didn't rupture his Achilles, he's probably consensus GOAT.
It's just tough to call that because he was only a leader for about half of those stats you were telling me about. So it's just really tough to. So you're telling me a comparable discussion.
So you're telling me
when he was the leader, when he finally did assume the role of leader, when he and Jerry Buss kicked Shaq out of town, they decided, oh, now it's finally going to be the time to win games. Oh, that didn't happen. He ended up being the buns. That's what I'm looking for. That's okay. All
right. Hold on. Let me interject there because I understand that for the first 8 seasons of Kobe's career, he had Shaq, 100%. Everybody's got help, but not everybody else helped like Shaq. Shaq was amazing.
Yeah.
With that being said, after Shaq, and you could argue this is partially Kobe's fault, so I'll hear that. That's fine. But after Shaq was hard to get along with too, and I know you freaking know this, Russell. I know you know this. Like, Shaq is a tough teammate, and we're learning about that years and years afterwards as more people are saying crazy stuff about Shaq on podcasts. It's not like Shaq should get out of this just like cleanly fine, okay? He's
not disagreeing. Not disagreeing.
Okay? Now, here's the thing. Kobe had Shaq, but he had a lot of years where he had garbage. He had Nick Young. He had Robert Sacre. He had Jerry Lin after he's washed up. And then those middle years where Chucky Atkins was the starter. And then after that, you had Smush Parker and he had Luke Walton and he had Chris Mem. Listen, people want to say Tim Duncan did a great job leading his San Antonio Spurs to the championship in 2003. And I agree. But I don't care. It's not that team. It's not any team that Tim Duncan has ever had has been as terrible as some of those teams that Kobe was on. He had Greg Popovich the entirety of his career. What Duncan always had that Kobe didn't was stability. He began his career with Sean Elliott and with David Robinson, who was still a top 3 player in the Defensive Player of the Year rankings, okay? And the only reason why Duncan went to that team as the first overall pick was because David Robinson got hurt. They weren't truly that bad. Look throughout the 90s. The Spurs were winning 50, 60 games. Year in, year out. He gets hurt. They got a few other injuries. They get Tim Duncan. And, of course, they go on a dominant run. And so Kobe's never had that kind of stability. What would Kobe have been if he always had at least a solid team and he had Phil Jackson the entirety of his career? So if you're going to play the Shaq card, you got to play that
been miserable
card with Duncan as well. Go ahead.
He would have been miserable. If you had put Kobe on the Spurs in that same situation, him and David Robinson are getting into fights because, like you said, David Robinson, exactly. You know why? And it has nothing to do with David Robinson. It has everything to do with the fact that Kobe would have walked in thinking he was the best player in the world, like he did, because that is well reported. And guess what? They would not have won the championship in 1999. And I think that could have been a better roster fit with Kobe over Duncan in that spot. So from a roster construction standpoint, it would actually probably be a little better. But no, you know why? Because Kobe was too busy worried about himself and not the team. And I think that matters. I think Duncan provided the stability. I think that is an incredibly important thing that you kind of glossed over there. Duncan is the stability. He is the
I'm not just talking about stability, but I'm talking about a supporting cast and a great coach throughout the entirety of his career. Duncan definitely deserves credit for that, 100%. Yeah. And yes, I'll even agree with you. Kobe was not always a great leader. He had to grow into that leader, and even Kobe would tell you that. Like, he had to grow to be that leader. Hold on. Real quick. He had to grow to be that leader. But again, who's better on defense? Tim Duncan or Kobe? All right. How big is that gap?
Not very much.
Okay. Who's better on offense? Tim Duncan or Kobe?
Incredibly arguable.
Absolutely not.
Wow.
And it's not.
Wow. That's your take. No wonder why you think Duncan's better. That's your take? You think that's debatable?
If we're talking scorers, you got me, Kobe. If we're talking all-around offensive players, I think it's a lot more arguable than people give Tim Duncan credit for. But if we're talking about scorers, you guys got me. But I don't think that's fair to limit
20,
offensive.
22 points per game, shooting 50% as an offense.
Uncle
I get it.
Yeah, even though Uncle Drew always said the game's about getting buckets, that's not what offense is about entirely. And I think that there's a lot of things that people don't talk about when it comes to Tim Duncan's game that he is underrated for, because that's kind of his whole thing. But going back to building into a leader, because I really want to touch on that. Would you agree that recruiting is an important part of, getting better players to your team, especially in a place like Los Angeles? You live there. Beautiful there. Easy to get free agents.
Not at the time.
Not at the time. It's not nice in Los Angeles, California to live there.
No, I'm saying not at the time was it beneficial for bringing guys in. That was not as common as it is in this current NBA with free agency. It changed a lot significantly after LeBron James moved in free agency. That the free agency over the last 15 years versus the free agency in Kobe's first 15 years of his career.
I'm glad you brought up the last 15 years, because I'm going to bring up 2015, right? In 2015, there was free agents. Actually, not that many free agents. And there was one that you guys like to poop on frequently, named LaMarcus Aldridge, who at that point was going off for the Portland Trail Blazers and was well on his way to being a fairly consistent perennial all-star in the NBA. And he was right in the meat of his prime, right? He was 29 years old at this point. He's a free agent. First time in free agency. He has 2 meetings. One with the Lakers and one with the Spurs, right? He has 2 meetings. Kobe's there. Kobe and Tim Duncan are both in this meeting, in each of these meetings. One guy who's 37 years old, after an Achilles injury, after, he's got 2 busted legs, is about to call it a career after this meeting, right? A few months later. He tells Marcus Aldridge that he'd love to see him as his pal Gasol. His beta dog, essentially, which is exactly what Pau Gasol did. Tim Duncan looked at it and said, listen, brother, you're taking over after I'm gone. I'm on the way out. This is it. I'm not fighting for alpha status with a 29-year-old star. It's not what I'm doing. He was obviously passing the torch. I think that has a lot to do with what happened with the 2 careers. I really do. There's one guy who's completely self-aware, and there's another guy who is not. And I think that matters. Call me crazy.
Okay. That's where I got to disagree with you a little bit because, first off, our personalities, mine and yours, are a little bit different. And so when it comes down to like leadership, you're talking about Tim Duncan, he's almost like the Steve Nash type, he's going to be relatable. He's going to connect with you. He's going to be quiet. He's going to lead by example, but he's not necessarily going to push you. He's not necessarily going to challenge you. That's not bad leadership. Something like Michael Jordan, as he said in his doc, and he had a pretty successful record from it. He pushed people when they didn't want to be pushed. Some leaderships can work. Like LeBron James, I think is a perfect example. Dwight Howard was a bad player for Kobe because they did not get along. They did not blend. LeBron is a much better player with a sensitive guy like Dwight Howard. I think it's fair to call Dwight Howard a sensitive guy based on his interviews, based on how he's constantly talking about how he felt during his first run with Kobe and everything. He's a sensitive guy. LeBron is better for that type of guy to get the best out of him. But myself personally, when I couldn't beat a video game growing up, my dad would insult me over and over again. And because of how I'm wired, I wanted my dad to shut the hell up. I'm going to show you I can beat this kid. There are those guys that, you need to be pushed. Pau Gasol was perfect for Kobe in that way because you push Pau, and Pau says, all right, fine. Let me show you. I'm going to push back. He didn't cower when Kobe drove right through his chest in those Olympic Games. He rose to the occasion. So that's the only part where, I'm going to push back a little bit because I'm like, you're talking about differences and leadership styles, and I'm not quick to say one is better than the other. I think certain ones are much more necessary. I don't think you get the best out of Pau Gasol, and he's well equipped to take on the Boston Celtics by being his friend. You got to teach him to be physical. You got to teach him to embrace that challenge. Kobe talked about how his buddies wanted them to go out to the nightclub and all that sort of thing. And what does Kobe do? He goes out with them, enjoys an evening out on the town, and then come 4 a.m, he's knocking on their hotel door and said, all right, we did your thing. Now let's do my thing. You come with me to the gym and we're putting our workout in. And now those guys on his team are going, well, I'm not spending a night out on the town anymore drinking alcohol. If this is what we're doing, that's leadership too, And so different styles, but leadership as well.
I believe, in my opinion, that one works for more people than the other. Just my opinion. I think you can name on one hand the amount of people, like even between Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, like Scottie Pippen, Pau Gasol, Steve Kerr.
Yeah. But Ross,
the list gets kind of short after that. Duncan, I could name a bunch of people. There's a whole list.
But wouldn't you say peak dominance is a huge factor when it comes to these players? Wait, I know the main argument for Michael Jordan is how at his peak he was so dominant. I would say Kobe Bryant had multiple times in his career where at his peak he was completely dominant. And in that 3-year span without Shaq, he goes to 3 straight NBA finals. In the midst of that, he faces Tim Duncan and those Spurs, and they smoke him. He completely he was easily named during this time from 2003 to 2011. Kobe Bryant was the best player in the world. There were literally people who were getting interviewed, NBA players who were getting interviewed, asking who was the best player in the league, and there's a whole slew of guys saying
that doesn't mean anything to me.
If your peers at the time, when both you and Tim Duncan are playing at the same time, if your peers are saying you're the better player, I don't know.
That's not going to affect my opinion, though. That's fine. This is all my opinion, and that's not going to. What other people think doesn't affect how I think all the time in these situations.
So at that time, when you were watching,
when I made a video for Johnny, fairly recently in the last year, where I gave the best player in the world championship belt to Tim Duncan for the exact years that you just said. The exact years. Basically 2003 to 2007. And then I gave it to Kobe immediately after that. I think both players had a period of time where they were the best player in the world. I definitely think that's fair. But in my opinion, and I think it is a razor thin margin, I'll say it again, I give it to Duncan because of the intangibles. Because I think on the court, I think they're both two of the greatest players to ever play, but I think the difference is in the details. And for me, the details is leadership, and I think Tim Duncan was an infinitely better leader than Kobe, in my opinion, and that gives me the reason to put him where I put him. It's just my 2 cents.